Welcome everyone to Community United for Safety and Protection Education, the Summer Education Series. Thanks so much for joining us on this beautiful day. I don't know where you are, but here in Anchorage, it's gorgeous. Our goal for these series are to inform Alaskans about sex work and sex trafficking policy in Alaska. So this week, we're going to be focusing on common lies about sex trafficking. So as we begin, CUSP acknowledges that we gratefully reside on unceded lands, and we invite you to join us in honoring and expressing deep gratitude to all Indigenous people of Alaska, where we are conducting our work. So please reach out, and if you have any audio or visual issues during our presentation, I will be manning the chat, so reach out. This webinar will be recorded, and it's going to be available as a recording on the website on sextraffickingalaska.com. And this is approximately 1 hour. So there's going to be time for questions after. And feel free to add those to the chat or write them down. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So I know I'm next slide. So community, you might be asking, if you haven't been here before, what is CUSP? What does CUSP stand for? So CUSP stands for Community United for Safety and Protection. So we are a group of current and former sex workers. We're sex trafficking survivors and allies that are working towards safety and protection for everyone in Alaska's sex industry. And I'm going to turn it over to Tara.
Unmute, Tara.
You should be unmuted.
Maxine, could you go a couple more slides ahead?
Whoops.
Yeah.
Oh. Yep. So this is our first lie, that the average age of entry into prostitution is 13 or 14 years old. So Rep Vance opened or gave this as part of her introduction to House Bill 258 in the House Finance meeting this year. It was originally told by the FBI in a document entitled Fiscal Year 2011 Budget Request at a Glance. But since then, they've told journalists at the Poynter Institute that this was not a factual statement. Sometimes people say that this is just the average age of entry for minors. That's also not true. And we're going to play our little clip from the legislature this year.
In Alaska, the common age of recruitment is 14 to 16 years old, and the average lifespan once recruited is 7 years.
In Alaska, this lie started out in the Attorney General's Task Force on Human Trafficking that put out a report in 2013 where Governor Parnell's office reported that the average age of entry into prostitution was 12 to 14 years old, but there was no source given for that. Generally, the statistic is attributed to Melissa Farley. However, Melissa Farley attributes this statistic to a study by Silbert and Pines. Can you do the next slide, Maxine? And Silbert and Pines, actually, when you look at their study, it said that 13 is the average age at which underage female prostitutes, that's the term that they used, first had sex with a boyfriend. So we just have here, the cover of that report that had the lie, and also Governor Parnell's letter, which I couldn't fit all on that slide. And then the next slide, Maxine. So back in 2015, the Washington Post gave this lie 4 Pinocchios. And next slide. We do have some research about the age at which people first enter the sex industry. So when I did my graduate research at UAF and I surveyed 40 people with recent experience in Alaska's sex trade, the average age of entry was 19 years old. Most of the people entered between 18 and 22 years old. There were 3 25-year-olds, 2 13-year-olds, and 5 16 to 17-year-olds. More recently, next slide, Maxine. Coyote I'm the research and policy director for Coyote, Rhode Island. So more recently, Coyote surveyed 277 people who have recent experience in the sex industry in the United States. And only 10% of them had entered the industry as minors. But I thought what was interesting is if you look at these two charts down here at the bottom, when we look at all participants, it peaks at like 6 to 10 years, and there's less that have been in the industry for 21 or more years, which is what is down there at the bottom. But when we look at people who entered the industry as minors, they're much more likely to have been in the industry for 21 plus years. So this is not telling us how many people are entering the industry as minors right now, right? Very few of them had entered the industry within the last 3 to 6 years. Most of them had been in the industry for 21 years or longer. And there's a lot of ideas that we could take from that. But generally we don't have a whole lot of information about our community because we're hiding from the cops, we're hiding from the government. It's hard to collect information about people that are hiding. And then the next slide, Maxine. And so then we're just going to tell you about our experiences of entering the industry and how old we were. Do you want to go first, Maxine?
Yeah, so I was 25.
Amber?
Yeah, I was 30 actually when I entered. Yeah.
And I was really young. I was trafficked as a young teenager by my father. All right, next slide. Purple.
It's going to be Maxine right here.
My glasses on. Let's see. Oh, the average life expectancy of a prostitute is 7 years after entering the sex industry. Let me play some misinformation about that. Oh boy.
If you want to possibly let me share my screen, I think that I can. Oh yeah, let me see.
Sorry.
Nope, I'm not doing it on mine. So sorry.
Hang on, I'm gonna try to, no.
It's not you, Maxine. It's
Okay,
we
how
made a
about this?
mistake. Yep.
It's okay.
Okay, here we go.
Simply.
So the truth in academia, mortality in a long-term open cohort of prostitute women study that was published in 2004 found that out of 1,969 women who had been arrested for prostitution over a period from 1967 to 1999, that's 32 years. And during that time, 117, which is 1% of that larger number, died. So the primary cause of death were violence and drugs. AIDS and death occurred only among injection drug using sex workers. So Mary Elizabeth Coleman's in her 2019 speech at the General Laws Committee hearing said a girl's life expectancy is 7 years after entering into prostitute. That backtracks to the FBI. When asked Coleman about her source for the statistics, she cited a 2011 FBI document. So the document in question, which doesn't cite a specific study, states the average age of a new child prostitute is 13 and the life expectancy becoming a child prostitute is 7 years. But when the Political Fact reached out to the FBI for a 2015 fact check, an agency spokesman backtracked, saying in an email that it should not be considered a general statement of FBI finding, yet we find that their misstatement is being spewed in the Alaska State Legislature in 2024. Oops. So, according to Rebecca Quigley in 2015, in a comment on the state of the state TV program, once a woman enters into the sex trade, her average life expectancy is 7 years. So here we are again with the same, misinformation, same lie. So she, like others on the internet, are incorrectly quoting the FBI budget report that only deals with child prostitution and offers no documentation towards that end. And the FBI is now trying to set the record straight. There's little doubt that prostitution can be one of the most dangerous endeavors undertaken by a woman because it's criminalized. But the 7-year claim is a flat out lie. So be sure to recognize that lie when you see it.
So, and then we're just kind of going to go around and talk about the truth from our lived experiences again. So I've been in the sex industry for, gosh, almost 30 years, maybe more than 30 years now, and I'm still alive. Violence does not really happen in the sex industry to people like me, people who are not marginalized, who are not living on the edge, people who are able to, have good boundaries and have a lot of agency over the way that we work, are not really at risk for violence on a regular basis, the way that street-based sex workers or sex workers who are more desperate for money because, like maybe they need to make their rent money for their kids that night, that kind of thing puts people in, desperate circumstances where really bad things can happen to them.
Right. So I want to talk about, the things that we do to stay safe are criminalized. When we were working together, I mean, now that could be a Class A or a Class B or Class C, but right now in Alaska, they just passed HB 66. And part of that is if someone is working with another person and they're considered a prostitution enterprise, they can now be charged not only with a Class B felony, but also be placed on the sex offender registry. So the things that I have always done to kind of stay safe, like screen clients or work with others so I can feel safe, that is definitely criminalized. I have worked for 20 years as a sex worker in Alaska, and I can tell you that I feel like I haven't experienced violence because I was able to work around other sex workers for those first 10 years. The things that we do are more criminalized, and that creates stigma, and that creates more violence on sex workers. Maxine?
Yep. So I have been working in the business for 35 plus years, and I pretty much plan on working for another 35 plus more. I started working in the massage parlors in Anchorage, Alaska. And back in the 80s, well, even before that, those massage parlors had been in business for decades by the time I started working in them in the mid 1980s. We worked together. There were always other workers around. We were always able to inform each other, oh, this is a good customer, or, you need to be careful with this one. But because the clients knew that there were other people in the house, I mean, we never had an incident where we had to feel afraid for our safety. A lot of our clients were regular clients. They knew what to expect. We knew what to expect. We had access to showers, you know, laundry. We had clean laundry. We had access to, you know, for longer shifts, you know, we would order food, we'd be able to eat, you know, just things that workers need to do together on our jobs. And because of the criminalization of the sex trafficking rhetoric at the federal level, a lot of those houses were forced to close and go out of business because the people that operated them were charged with felonies at the state and federal level. So that's highly unfortunate to have that, to not have those spaces to, you know, go and work for a week in Anchorage, you know. Now, you know, you have to rent a hotel. It's very expensive to rent hotels together, to work out of, or to stay together, is now considered a second-degree sex trafficking and is eligible for register on the sex offender list. So now, you know, you haven't even put your hands on anybody and you end up on the sex offender register list. So it renders that public safety tool useless now, because the public expects that that tool is going to be used for to inform the public about, you know, who is a dangerous person that has done a dangerous, you know, unconsensual, violent sexual contact with somebody. But now that won't be true with the passing of House Bill 66. So these bad sex trafficking laws really do a disservice to the public's safety overall.
Okay, so I am sharing about this. So it has lie on there because this is a lie, but this has been stated. This was actually stated last session from a church group when they were talking about changing some of the sex trafficking laws. So it was stated sex trafficking victims want to be arrested and have a criminal record for prostitution. When we were putting this together, I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And they're like, no, Amber, go back and listen to this. And I did. And I guess I almost become oblivious to some of the things that are stated at some of these hearings that are occurring in Juneau when some of these church groups come. So if you've been paying attention, you've heard members of a church group or, you know, tell politicians that sex trafficking survivors are crying themselves to sleep at the thought of Alaska having, you know, sex work decriminalized. Obviously, this is ridiculous. Being arrested is traumatic. I can tell you that myself for being arrested for sex trafficking, 7 counts in 2014. But, you know, being tricked by the police when they're doing a prostitution sting, that's pretty traumatic as well. And that has been going on in Alaska, thanks to Tara actually doing some writing. That's actually stopped. They have not been doing prostitution stings like that for some time. But the police are telling service providers and the media that they are being rescued while they're doing these stings and having sex with them. So having to go along with the narrative to get services or to avoid criminal charges, losing custody of your children, that's incredibly damaging. And when you have to go along and say, I was sex trafficked because you're afraid of a prostitution charge or something, you know, nefarious like that, that doesn't make sense. So when people are saying sex trafficking victims want to be arrested and have a criminal record for prostitution, that is a lie. Next slide is what I was just talking about. You can skip to the next one as well.
So one of the lies that's often told is that our clients are abusive and arresting them will stop trafficking. So we heard this lie told over and over in Alaska this last legislative session. So the truth is that clients are oftentimes our first responders. you know, so if a client answers the ad and they, you know, go to, you know, have a visit with somebody and they realize, this person maybe doesn't belong in the sex trade, or this person is involved with people that are abusive. You'll see clients provide that person with a phone, with money, go to get something to eat, pay for the hotel room, move hotel rooms, buy a new phone so people can have more independent means to operate and just get them on to their next right thing. But it's important to know that clients need to be able to come forward with information that could assist in actual sex trafficking cases. So creating laws that recriminalize clients only disincentivizes them from reporting sex trafficking, and it leaves them outside of the equal protection under the law. So we want our clients to be included in the immunity provision that actual sex workers have in Alaska, which is that if you're a victim or a witness to serious crimes like sex trafficking, you can report it without the threat of being arrested or having any sort of, a charge on your record. So policymakers know this, and you can tell from the 2016 Anchorage Ordinance number 115 required that other types of businesses with higher rates of trafficking to address that by, address that forced labor by hanging signs and asking clients to be vigilant about forced labor. So policymakers have heard a lot of testimony about isolated sex trafficking victims confiding in clients after they have built trust. So that is something that goes on in our industry, right? So why is our industry, all of a sudden our clients are, second degree, being called sex traffickers? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So violent criminals who pose as clients in order to gain access to victimize us are not actual clients. So that would be, for example, like that Brian Stephen Smith, who was just convicted of serial killing in Anchorage. He was not a customer. He posed as a customer to be able to gain access to victims because he was a violent criminal. And so there's a big difference there, and we want everybody to know and understand what that difference is.
Thanks, Maxine. So I have the lie: a scary stranger in a van will kidnap you and sex traffic you. You can switch to the next one. So this really speaks about the sensationalism that we hear in the media about some things. It's kind of akin to old-fashioned ideas about rape only happening through kidnapping by a stranger, or when we know most rapes are committed by people that the victim knows. Sex trafficking often happens to people who are trying to get into sex work or who are already sex workers, and traffickers are usually maybe family members, boyfriends, or friends. Traffickers especially do look for victims who already have a reason to fear the police. So sensationalist stories spread myths and misconceptions. It causes harm. This can distort public understanding, and really the realities of sex trafficking are not in this. This leads to ineffective and harmful responses to actual sex trafficking. So a small percentage of traffickers are more interested in abusing women than in making money as well.
And if you think about just kind of the logic of it, if you were to use any other business where people are, one-on-one with other people, like house cleaning, imagine if you had a house cleaning business and you decided that you were going to go and kidnap somebody from Home Depot in a van and like force them to go into people's houses and clean the houses. The people in the houses would notice that you've been kidnapped and there's something wrong, and they would not want to hire you to come back to clean their house again. It's just not a business model that works. So the next lie is that there's a lot of sex trafficking going on in Alaska, and we just don't have the right laws, or we do have the right laws, but we just don't have the investigative resources to catch these evil sex traffickers. And this one was told this year by Matt Clayman on House Bill 66.
And one of the reasons that Alaska has not had a lot of sex trafficking prosecutions is not because we lack the laws to make that illegal. It is illegal. It's because we haven't been able to put the resources into public safety to do those investigations, which is why they're commonly referred to the federal government to do those investigations.
The truth is our laws are really broad. Our laws are so broad that in one case in Fairbanks, a totally independent sex worker was charged with sex trafficking for aiding or facilitating her own prostitution. The sex trafficking law does not focus very much. Only a small part of the sex trafficking law is about abusing sex workers or forcing somebody into prostitution. Most of the sex trafficking law just focuses on like anything to do with prostitution. So like if you give a friend a ride to work, that's sex trafficking. If you are a babysitter for a sex worker and you receive money from her prostitution, that's sex trafficking. Like anybody around a sex worker can be charged with sex trafficking, and we can be charged with sex trafficking ourselves. So it's not that the laws are not good enough. And then next slide, Maxine. So we also, the state has been putting in the investigative resources. This is a status report from the Special Crimes Investigative Unit, which was formed in 2014 with the primary mission of to locate and rescue juvenile victims that are being forced to work as prostitutes. And at this time in 2015, this unit had 1 sergeant and 2 investigators. That's 3 full-time officers and also a lab technician who are full-time trying to locate and rescue juvenile victims that are being forced to work as prostitutes. Since 2014, this unit has not, there's not been one case of trafficking a minor that was charged as a result of this unit. We brought forward a case that was of trafficking a minor that was charged, but these 3 full-time police officers and the full-time investigator who are costing the state $800,000 a year, over $800,000 a year last time we knew, have not been able to locate any minors. And it's not because they're not out there doing prostitution stings.
So this is me. So I want to expand upon that because in 2014, I can tell you what they were doing. They were tracking me. They were following me around, and they were having the woman that I didn't hear them back. Can you hear me? They're having the person that they did the sting for that was, I was working with wear a wire and bringing her through all this trauma. So that's what they were doing in 2014. They were really putting a lot of time, resources, and effort into me, 30-something-year-old sex worker working with other sex workers. So I also wanted to talk about this one. This is more recent. This is the SCIU, focusing on primarily prostitution stings of sex workers, sex trafficking survivors, and our clients. So this was going on in January of 2022, which actually resulted in charges against 22 men, both in Anchorage and in Fairbanks, that were attempting to solicit sex from sex workers. So troopers posed as women soliciting sex for money during the operation, and then they contacted the men when they arrived at the locations, whether it was Fairbanks or Anchorage. So I do want to say, like, one of my clients was actually arrested on this, and he had contacted me right around the time and set up an appointment, and then he disappeared. So I don't know if that was the officer that had his phone that was trying to further, do a prostitution kind of operation. And then they're like, oh, wait, we know who this is. This is Amber Batts. And then they were like, never mind. Or if it was him and he just kind of got arrested during that whole time. I also have a friend that works and she was contacted by somebody and she went and met this person and she got into their vehicle. And she was very uneasy. And then all of a sudden the truck pulled up behind them and then they got into the vehicle with her. So she was in there with 3 officers that were asking her, are you safe? Do you work for anyone? Why are you doing this? We want you to tell us, who taught you how to do this, who put you into the industry. And then she contacted me afterwards. She was really shooken up and she was really afraid. She didn't know if she was going to be harmed. She didn't know if she was going to be arrested. She's a mother. So these are the kind of stings that they're doing when they're looking for sex trafficking victims. They're doing things in a way that actually, I mean, if there was a victim and someone accosted that victim like that, that is not the way to actually provide services and resources to victims. Next.
Okay, so we're gonna look at here is the Anchorage Police Department and the FBI task force awarded the Anchorage municipality a grant. And this grant was awarded in 2021, and it was to the tune of $749,755. So that's a lot of money to be awarding these law enforcement agencies for these human trafficking operations. And that's who's funding these prostitution sting operations, because we all know that human trafficking it's just a euphemism for prostitution sting operation. They're just doing prostitution sting operations. They're putting up fake ads. They're seeing who responds to the ads, and then they're harassing them and intimidating people and making people feel afraid of the police. And it doesn't do anything to further the public's safety. It doesn't do anything to further the public's health, because carrying condoms can still be used as evidence of prostitution. It doesn't do anything to actually locate and find sex trafficking victims. Yeah, so this is a Alaska U.S. attorney announces more than, $65 million that are going to be available to fight human trafficking and help trafficking victims. So this is from the U.S. Attorney General in the District of Alaska, $65 million. These are just going, they say they're going to serve adults and children, but really it's just going to recriminalize people and, into their fake wraparound services. Don't get me started on that.
So we have all of these resources. We have a whole unit of the state troopers who are just going around doing these prostitution stings on workers and customers trying to find sex trafficking. We have this APD FBI task force where there are several full-time officers at the FBI and at least one at APD. We've got hundreds of thousands of dollars, close to $1 million going through each of these agencies, or through the state troopers, and then also through this task force every year to investigate sex trafficking. And despite that, when we look at prosecutions, we have many years where there are 0 sex trafficking prosecutions. And if you look at the Crime in Alaska Sex Offenses Report, and this is a report that tells you how many cases of a crime were reported to law enforcement each year. So it's reported to law enforcement looks at the statutes or their training manual or whatever and says, yeah, that counts as sex trafficking. And they make a little hash mark there. So, you might have heard that some of these places like my house or Covenant House or my house have dozens and dozens of sex trafficking victims every year. And they're mandated reporters. So we know that if there were actually a minor who was being trafficked by a trafficker, that they would call and report that to law enforcement. So with all of that going on, there are still only 1 to 2 cases reported to law enforcement every year in Alaska of sex trafficking.
Right. So what do police and prosecutors do when they can't find enough actual sex traffickers to meet the demand that they've created for sex trafficking cases and justify all of that funding, that $65 million? Well, they make sex trafficking laws broader, like what they did with the HB 66, right? And they pour incredible amounts of public money into prosecuting sex workers like me for sex trafficking, myself for working with others. When I think about all the money that they spent putting a tracker on my vehicle, using all the resources, time, and money to fly people to Juneau and to Fairbanks, the time that they put into prosecuting, getting all of the evidence ready and paying Adam Alexander and, the prosecutor and in the evidence and the DA. And, I think like what a waste of time and money. When I finally made it out on bail, I went on food stamps and I had to go on assistance. So I was holding even more money from the state. So this is not how to effectively address sex trafficking, the small number of cases that we do have.
So we're at the end of our presentation. We're ready to do some questions and answers. Thanks for learning and listening about sex worker issues and sex trafficking policy. So are there any questions in the chat that we want to address, Amber?
Let me take myself off mute. I do not have any questions. If somebody has any questions, you can write it out or maybe like raise your hand on here and I can take you off mute, whatever works. I know somebody's got to have some questions. There's no wrong questions. There's no stupid questions, so ask away.
And we already know you just want to hear about sex trafficking, so don't worry.
Right. I will say that we will get the whole video thing kind of figured out when we upload this onto the website. So sorry about that. We are funded ourselves, like we do this all ourselves. We don't get paid to do this. We don't get any big grants or any monies like the NGOs do. So this is, for me, a labor of love because of what happened to me. Sally asks, what laws are Ledge currently trying to get passed? Right, let me open that up.
Sally, you should have been here last month when we did an hour-long presentation about the laws. But that video is available and it was linked in our last newsletter. Amber, is it up on the website now too?
Yep, it sure is. It's up on the website. But real quick, they made it so my charge is now a sex offender registrable offense. And they really tried to get felony prostitution on the books. And if there was no cusp, if there was no Maxine or Tara or Amber, there'd be felony prostitution in this state, I can guarantee. Looks like we got another message here. What legislative fixes would work? I agree that this is a legislative obsession nationally. Gun violence is a much bigger problem, and your point about resources is a valid one, and that's from Josephson. So what legislative fixes would work? I know, Maxine, you're going to want to go off on a tangent, but let's keep it short and sweet.
I'll try to land the plane. Yeah, so, we have a legislative policy that we produce every year. We have our draft legislation, and so when you say what fixes would work, well, it depends on what you have framed as the problem. Constantly framing the problem as trying to address sex trafficking, which is a small amount of people which are really in a situation of poverty. And then you've got this larger group of people who are working in an underground economy consensually. Really our fix is that if you remove the criminal penalties for prostitution, then you can better see who is in our industry by force and who is in the industry of their own volition, because it's in everybody's best interest in our industry to, you know, identify folks that don't belong here and help them get them onto the next right thing in their life without arresting a bunch of people for prostitution. You know, there's already these really punitive laws that are already on the books. There's already tons of money going into all these resources. And so our policies address bringing up the work conditions for our population. And, you know, we think that that's a direct line into identifying people that don't belong in the industry and to help them.
Wow, Maxine, that was like the quickest I've ever heard you say that. That's point on. Yeah, I think of like decriminalizing sex work will not decriminalize sex trafficking. So sex trafficking will still be sex trafficking, but to criminalize us is a waste of time and resources. And yeah, I completely agree that gun violence is a much bigger problem. I don't want to go into all of what I think about that as well, but yes, the resources and then the money about the education this whole time. We know where that education money is going. It's going to combat sex trafficking. So
there are, without decriminalizing, which would really fix everything, you know, we do have some suggestions for things that can reduce the harms of the laws, like allowing clients to be included in immunity to report crimes, or making it an aggravator if a perpetrator targets somebody because they are involved in sex work. And we would be happy to send you the drafts for those, Rep. Josephson.
Thank you. And I'll follow up with Amber with some questions. No doubt the law is not nuanced enough. I'm sure it's not. One of the problems you ran into is that it was tied to a fentanyl bill. Right. So legislators don't want to vote against a tough fentanyl bill. That was a problem.
Yeah.
And sadly, my own senator brought that forth when he knew how our feelings were. He did not need to bring that in there, and he did. So that did not get lost on me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another problem was that it was an omnibus bill that was created like less than 2 weeks before session was over, was introduced and passed out of its first committee on the same day with no public testimony. And so, I mean, the whole process of that omnibus bill was horrifying.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Amber, I likely will follow up with you. Okay.
Okay. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. Take care.
Yep. You too. Okay. Any other questions? I've got something from Bella. In 2015, the government spent $676 million given to nonprofits that would create awareness about trafficking. Yep, host public trainings on how to spot trafficking, encourage people to call the cops on sex workers, and they shouldn't support decrim or talk to people like Maxine, Tara, or Amber. Follow the money, and she's got a pretty good link there. That Truth articles. Yeah.
I just want to
Thank
say,
you.
you know, yeah, thanks for that, Bella, that the money that's spent by the federal government that's being given to local governments and grant funds, you know, really incentivizes local police departments to spend time doing these prostitution sting operations under the guise of rescuing sex trafficking victims. But it's having the effect of misprioritizing the public's safety priorities. Like, you know, Andy Josephson just said, you know, the gun violence is a much bigger issue, but you can't address it because the police are too busy, you know, putting up fake ads, you know, pretending to be, you know, prostitutes, or pretending to be our customers, you know, sitting around in hotel rooms, you know, texting us and not really doing the hard work of really investigating the real serious crime that the public is really concerned about. So that's a big problem when we see these sex trafficking monies, usurp the public's safety priorities. Okay, with that, shall we wrap up here? Are there any more questions, comments, or concerns?
Nope, I think that's it.
Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. We're going to be doing another class on a Zoom class on July 16th at 7 p.m. Alaska time. It's going to be about learning about the actual sex trafficking cases that are actually filed in Alaska. I put classes, not cases. Oh, cases classed in Alaska. Oh boy. Oh, where was I that day? Anyway, I just want to thank Amber and Tara for just being great partners and working together on our organization. You can go to our website at sextraffickingalaska.com. We're also on Facebook at Community United for Safety and Protection. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and we'll see you next month to talk about the actual sex trafficking cases in Alaska.
Bye.